Bam! What's happening, FlowChat Connector? Back here with another high-ticket tune-up. In this video today, we're going to talk about 25 of the most useful stories to tell during a sales call. Stay tuned. What's happening, FlowChat Connector? Sean back at you with another high-ticket tune-up. FlowChat sales trading today. Hope you're having a great day. Today's Thursday. Don't forget, today is the best day to go prospect, the best day to go close deals. So if you're not out there doing that, make sure you get on your horse and go do that. Don't forget to smash that like button and share this out to those people that need it so we can make traditional salespeople become sales professionals and get better at sales. And please smash that subscribe button. Today, we're diving into something that I think is a very interesting topic. I had a question that came in from Tammy, and Tammy asked me this. She said, Sean, I keep hearing that we need to sell using stories. Truth. And my mind goes blank on how to build stories I can use during a sales call. Do you have any ideas? Yes, of course I do. And while we all know, like they say, don't try to tell, rather sell. And then when you sell, you should always use a story. And I think there's certain places in a sales conversation that stories are extremely relevant. And so I came up with a new, I was reading a new book recently, and I came across this infographic that I want to share with you. And it's not from me, but it's a very, very succinct one-page picture that if you want to tell stories during a sales conversation, that it's something that you can use. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about where to use stories during a sales conversation. I think it's going to be valuable. All right, so let's dive into it because I want to talk through this because this is really, really powerful. If you are doing sales conversations and you're like, Sean, where in the heck do I put the stories? What do I even tell a story about? How do I create a story that I can use during a sales conversation? This is going to be the right message for you. So here in this intro, okay, so I was reading this book called Sell with a Story, a guy named Paul Smith. He wrote the book, really good book. And this is kind of his process of the compartments of a sales conversation. So introduce yourself. Obviously, that's the bonding and connecting that we talk about, preparing for the sales call, building rapport, making the pitch, handling objections, closing the sale, and then managing customer relationships. Within each one of these little buckets, we can add some stories. And so I'm going to start with the first one, right? When you introduce yourself, where and how or what are some stories that we can actually talk about? Well, you could create a story around explaining what you do simply. Right? That could be a 1-sentence story. It could be a 2-minute story, but it shouldn't be more than about a 5-minute story. And likewise, who I've helped and how I've helped them, right? And one of the things that I focus on when we teach some of our principles is we have this thing called the 30-second commercial. I'm sure you've heard of that. Maybe like other people term it as an elevator pitch or whatever have you. And the way that I build this type of story for myself, just so I can be very transparent about this, is I have a 1-sentence thing that I say about what I do and who I help, right? So I help those who want to sell more by chat with providing and empowering them with the tools that they need so that they can succeed more. So something in that realm, right? That's kind of how I start this. And then who I helped and how I help them. Clients typically come to me when they're struggling with this. They're worried about that. They're annoyed this is going on. They're pissed off this is happening in their business. And that's how I start with my introductions. Works really, really well. But again, if you're introducing yourself and you need a place to tell a couple of stories, here's 1 and 2. These are some short stories that you can tell, whether it be 1 sentence or 2 minutes, right? Preparing for the call, right? So personal motivation, time take to relax and take the stress out of a call, right? So preparing for the sales call as you're getting into the conversation, you could drop a story about some personal motivation. Maybe they have something on the back wall that inspired you to talk about some other story or something that you already have in your mind, or to relax and take the stress out of the sales call. Make fun of yourself. Like that's another place to tell a good story. And by the way, so the framework here today is all of these bullet points, these numbers that I'm sharing with you. We should create something called a story bank. So you should take number 1, put it on a piece of paper, and then figure out what your story is for number 1. Figure out your story for number 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. So there is to relax and take the stress out of a sales call. Building rapport. If you want to build rapport, here's a couple of ways or where you could use a story. So you could tell a story about why you do what you do. You could tell a story about a mistake that you've made in the past and that what led you down the path of the Epiphany Bridge. I don't know if you know who Michael Haug is. He came out with this thing called The Tale of Two Stories, and it talks about the 2 journeys that anybody would take during any story, right? So you always have the success part of the story where it's like the tangible success, And then you have the transformational internal part of the story where it's like they leveled up as a person and changed their average, right? So you can always talk about a mistake that you've made. You can always tell a story about, I'll tell you when I can't help you, right? So, hey, I had this client that came in, and you tell the story and it's like, I wasn't able to help them. So I actually told them like, hey, I'm not able to help you. And then they fought back and still continue to come down the path. And this is where we got to with them. That's interesting. People will listen to that. I'll go to bat for you with my company. Now, if you're in a bigger sales company or a bigger company, this is something that you can do for yourself, which is a very powerful move to tell a story. It's like, hey, I have some strings and I can pull them to like open the parachutes and allow things to happen at a little bit of a faster level, but I need you to do this, and I can go back and do this, right? So another one is you could tell your client or prospective client like how you can pivot your organization to support them and serve them better. That's an easy story to talk through. I'm not who you think I am, right? So you could tell a story about like, hey, you know, everybody looks at our company and sees a bunch of success. That's not where I came from, right? That's interesting. People will be like, whoa, I'm listening. What's the story behind that, right? And they want to know I'm not who you think I am, right? So that's an interesting story. If you're talking about your company, definitely if you have founders or something like that, easy to talk about them. Like, hey, here's why Chris and Sean built this company, or here's why Joe decided to get involved with this industry or whatever. That's an easy story. People listen to that all day long. How you're different from your competitors. Typically in our world, I talk about our sales software company. And the number one difference between us and our competitors is the way we think. And that is so different, right? Because what we are sales brained folk over here at FlowChat. We are not marketing brained folk. So the biggest differentiator between all the other products on the market and ours is ours was built, developed, processed, managed, run by a sales brain person, not a marketing person. Now I love marketing and it's the kissing cousin of sales. However, if you look at a tech that's built and designed by a salesperson that's focused on getting results, getting like the always revenue, always relevant, as we always talk about, that's different than saying, oh, we're the marketing badasses over here and we can get you infinity leads and no problem, right? And there's a difference, big difference there, and you're just hearing it, right? So that's kind of the story that I go down when I talk about my company. Now, like I said, I don't tell all of these stories every single sales call. I pick and choose where I use what I use, and you should do the same. But you should build a story bank that includes stories about each and every one of these bullet points. So when you need to, you can pull it off the shelf and drop it right into a sales conversation. Next one, making the pitch, or if you're in the sales conversation, when you're finding the pain, or you're talking about budget or understanding their buying processes, you can talk about your product's invention or discovery. There's always going to be an interesting and juicy story around that, or explaining the problem that your company has solved. Easy to tell a story around that. Customer successes, that one should be a no-brainer. Everyone should have one of those. In that bucket number 14, what I do is on your paper, write number 14 and write down your top 3 stories, depending on how you want to do this, right? So customer success is interesting because you can position, if you have a lot of customers, there's going to be similar stories. And say, oh, you remind me of Joe. Let me tell you about Joe's story. And like Joey started here and then he struggled with this, and then he tried all these things and they didn't work, and he spent all this money, he got frustrated, and then he actually found us through this other person, and he came my way and I talked to him and I shared what he was doing. I understood what he struggled with and hadn't worked, and we were able to find this thing, and this is what happened, right? So those types of customer successes are very, very powerful, and that's why everyone says talk about your customer success stories. Today, I'm just giving you a bunch of different places where you can tell stories in a sales conversation. Number 15, 2 roads, right? So if you've told your story about your sale, the pitch that you're making, and you maybe say you're in the customer success story, I kind of blend 14 and 15 together. I say, well, Joe got to this place and he had a choice. He could either go this way or he could go that way. Those were the 2 roads that he could take, right? And the one road would lead down this way, and it wasn't with our organization, right? And the other road was with this way, and it was a big choice. He didn't know which one he was going to take, but what he looked at and what he determined and why he made the decision to go in our direction was blank, right? That's the 2 road story. Very powerful to talk about if you're in the sales conversation. Of course, you can talk about adding value. There's always stories there about how, like in our world, we have, nobody can replicate our culture. Nobody can replicate what we've built in our community. And then people always ask me sometimes, like, Sean, what if somebody steals your code? I don't care. Here's the code, right? Because you're not going to be able to replicate what we've done. And by the time you get to where we're at, we're going to be so far ahead, it doesn't even matter anymore. And then people are like, oh, that's crazy. But it's true, right? We develop faster than any other software company that I know. Okay, humble brag, right? So like we have a really really kick-ass tech team is what I'll say. So that's how you could tell a story about adding value during your sales conversation. Next one, if an objection pops up, right? Write down all your best objections, create a story around each and every one of those things. Put it on a piece of paper. Look, now you've got them. And once you memorize them, your sales conversation becomes easy. What I'm empowering you with today from Paul Smith, from his book, is if you can memorize stories about every single one of these things and you know them off the top of your head really quickly, when you get in that sales conversation and you hear it come up, you just start sharing the story and you can watch and you can stay hyper focused on what your prospect is doing, read their body language, understand what they're saying, and then continue, right? Negotiating price, another story you could tell there. Let me think about this one. So when I was selling electronics, I would always go into these big companies. I sold to Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and TRW Lucas and those types of organizations, business to government style of sale. And I would go in there and always meet with like the supply chain manager or the product manager or, the component purchasing person, or like there's a lot of people that I talked to, and everybody was doing their job trying to beat up their vendors, which I was at the time, to drop their prices. And so what I did is I started working on stories where I said, hey, look, like we're not the most, the least expensive, and here's why. And I would drop a story in there. And I would say that early in my conversation because then it would eliminate the objection before it even actually came up, which is number 19. So number 18 and 19 for me here, I actually usually kind of combine the two, and I would tell that story before we even got into the objection about why is your price so much. It's rather, well, no, it's not what mine was my price so much. It's you pay for what you get, right? You pay for what you get. So the higher the ticket price, the more value typically perceived in people's minds. That was mentally built into us from when we were little kids until we're now. So use that to your advantage in a sales conversation, right? A couple more here for closing the sale, creating a sense of urgency, right? The best story that I always talk about here is I'll say something along the lines of, don't wait. There's a couple of modalities that do you know what, like I go kind of more when I use this for me again, and they're going to be different for everybody, but creating a sense of urgency. I always talk about the modality of learning, right? So there's this whole thing about modalities: visual, audio, kinesthetic, right? So it's I see, I hear, I touch and feel, visual, audio, and kinesthetic. Well, there's another one. It's called audio digital. Nobody knows about it. And what audio digital means is self-talk, self-analyzation. Everybody does it, specifically if you're an entrepreneur, and it freezes you from making a decision, right? And so what I say is don't get stuck not making a decision, because velocity and speed are the friends of money. And so if you make a choice and you go down the path, make the choice and go quickly. And guess what? You're going to get the results fast. But if you do nothing, then you're going to be sitting here in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months from now, kicking yourself for not taking action back then when you should have, right? That's how you could create a story around urgency. I just use like the modality terminology to spark someone's interest in saying, whoa, that's an interesting topic. I've never heard about that, which is a real thing. I studied it for a long time. Arming your sponsor. This one is just, again, going to be talking about your person who is, your manager or your coach or your sponsor or even the founder of the business. Again, this one kind of dumps back into that, saying, here's why this person would have said, this is what you could and kind of should do, right? So if you don't have all the results personally as a sales professional, but your business does, you can say, let me talk about this particular sale that happened. My co-founder was talking to this person, and here's kind of what happened, and this is what they armed that person with and how you could have won, right? Coaching the breakup, right? A lot of times if you are speaking with somebody, they've already bought some other product or service or program from somebody else, and they love you after your sales conversation. They want to buy from you, but they're already still locked into either an agreement, a conversation, they're paying someone else for whatever the coaching that they're doing. We need to create a story around something they can hold on to, so when they go to actually have that breakup conversation, they don't get scared. So this is another great place to put a very, very powerful story if you have to have that part of a conversation during sales conversation. So what I typically do is I say, hey, look, sounds like you want to come our direction. Is that correct? And they say, yes. I say, well, my biggest fear, my problem, my one thing that I'm really worried about here is this. When you have to go back and tell your other coach, like, how are you going to break up with them? Like, what's that conversation going to sound like? And some people will say, oh, no problem, I'll just go do it. Well, okay, when do you plan on doing that? Like today, tomorrow? No, I'm going to do it today, tomorrow. Like this just happened to me actually yesterday. We had a client, and again, here I'm telling stories, right? So I always tell stories, and I tell little micro stories because I believe people pay attention to micro stories better than they will to big long stories unless they're in the mood to listen to some sort of like a TEDx presentation for 15 minutes. I try to keep minimum stories like 1 to 5 minute long. Most of my stories are about that long, unless I'm going deep on a presentation or something like that. But case in point, yesterday I'm talking to this guy and him and his one of his coaches, and he says to me, he's like, Sean, I'm paying like this exorbitant amount of money over here to this guy, and they're only getting me this type of result. And I said, well, when you're frustrated with that, like, how did it go? Like when you went back to him and you said, hey, I'm really frustrated with this, what did they tell you? And when he said to me, he's like, well, I did that 3 times. I was like, oh, what happened? And he said, well, the first time they just said, we'll look into it and we'll make some changes. The second time he dropped my price. The third time he dropped my price again, but the results haven't changed. And I'm pissed off because I'm still spending all this money and I don't want to waste money and not get the results that I'm looking for. Okay, so how are we going to go break up with that guy? And I just left it at that. And he came back to me and he said, no, well, I'm just not going to make the next payment. I'm going to email them and say, don't charge my card. I'm done. This will be the last thing that we do. Or is it going to be that easy? And he said, yes. And then guess what? He bought. And so that's how you could coach someone through a breakup, but having that conversation in a story, right? I just shared a story with you about that. You can use the same story if you want, like it's easy. That's the beauty of using little micro stories because you can win. And last but not least is once you get into the relationship, someone's purchased from you, the service after the sale, right? The idea of support, overwhelm, like anybody, the number one reason why people leave any sort of a program, a product, a service, a software, or anything is overwhelm. It's number one, overwhelm. Statistically proven, overwhelm. So if we can tell a story about how to prevent that overwhelm for a prospect or a client once they bought from us, they're never going to leave. So again, right, number 23, what is the story that you could tell around preventing overwhelm for your new clients, right? Do you have one in the back of your mind that you could write down, memorize, and then use it in your future? Next one's building loyalty, right? Here's how somebody worked with us for the first 6 months and got no results. Here, I got a story. There's a girl that's named Cheyenne, and she came to us originally when she started working with us. She's a young girl. She's about 20 years old. She wanted to be an entrepreneur, and we got involved in this product with her, and she struggled for about the first 13 months. In fact, she made no sales, but she kept showing up and she kept doing the activities. And eventually some things started to click in her mind. And right around that 8th month, she started making her first dollars. And then month 10, she almost equaled what she was making currently at her 9 to 5. Month 14, I think it was month 14 or 15, she made double what she was making at her work. And she said, I'm done, I'm out. And she left her 9 to 5 and she continued going down the path. But it took her longer, about 15 months, to actually really get into the swing of things. And so if you have a longer lead time for somebody in your world that has to get up and get going, I always drop this 18-month time frame. I say, like one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was from Ty Lopez. And again, I'm telling you a story about Ty Lopez, who's a great marketer. He's genius, right? And he's a super smart guy, even though there's a lot of controversy around him. He's hella intelligent. And he shared with me when I first got into my personal development, I bought something called the 67 Steps from him. And I listened to it. And one of those things was this timeline of 18 months. And it takes 18 months for anybody to get into any business endeavor, relationship, or anything. That's a good period of time to make a good decision. And so that's the story that I shared with this girl, Cheyenne, that came through with us. And her 15th month is when she doubled her regular 9 to 5 income. And then she said, no, look, I'm on it. I'm going to go. And by the 18th month, she's making more money than she ever could have thought, but it took that amount of time. So if you get struggling and frustrated, think back to the story and remember 18 months. Let's put your blinders on for 18 months now that you're a client with us and you're moving forward. And by that time, if we're not getting the results, then leave. Like that's easy to say, right? And you can say that because then it's going to give you at least a year and a half to go get results for your client, which is awesome, right? And then lastly is just summarizing the call. Oh my gosh, this call reminds me of boom, enter story. And so here are the 25 kind of best ways, according to Paul Smith, of most useful stories to tell during a sales conversation. I hope this one helped you. It was a little bit longer, but I feel like a lot of people are saying, wow, this is a pretty powerful idea. And take a snapshot of this because I think, a lot of people need this stuff and it's a pretty powerful lesson. With that said, you've just been tuned up. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Share this out to those people that need it. And I can't wait to see you next time. Bye for now.